I arrived at my father's house on Christmas, and he immediately said, "What a pain, because you always have to ruin family moments." So I pulled out an envelope with $15,000 in it and tore it up right in his face, telling him this was what you needed to pay off the debt on the house. My name is Mark. I am 38 years old. I work as a civil engineer, earning $9,500 a month, and for my entire life, I have been the son who was never good enough for his parents. Especially for my father, Frank, a 68-year-old bitter man who turned criticizing me into his favorite form of communication. I grew up hearing that I was a constant disappointment, hearing phrases like, "Mark got bad grades again," "Mark is no good at sports," "Mark is too sensitive," or "Mark will never be successful like the neighbor's kids." Every achievement of mine was minimized, and every mistake was amplified until it became more evidence of my supposed failure as a son. My mother, Sylvia, who is 65, never defended me. She simply nodded at everything my father said or remained silent while he verbally destroyed me, and over the years I understood that she had chosen her own comfort over my emotional well-being. I got married at 28 to Lucy, a wonderful woman who saw from the beginning how my family treated me, and she would tell me after every family gathering where my father found some way to humiliate me that I did not have to put up with that I could set boundaries and walk away. But I kept trying. I kept waiting for the day my father would look at me with pride, or the day my mother would defend me. We had 2 children, Tommy, who is 7, and Emma, who is 5, 2 beautiful kids who filled my life with a love I had never known in my own childhood, and through them, I learned what it means to be a real father, to support unconditionally and celebrate every little achievement. Meanwhile, I kept visiting my parents, taking my children to see their grandparents, organizing family dinners, and trying to maintain some kind of relationship despite my father's constant belittling. 6 months ago, I learned something that changed my perspective when my mother called me crying one afternoon to tell me that my father was very stressed because they had problems with the house mortgage, saying they were behind on payments and the bank was threatening foreclosure. She told me they needed $15,000 to get caught up or they would lose the house. So, I asked worriedly how they got to that point because I thought the house was almost paid off. My mother admitted that my father had refinanced a few years ago for some investments that didn't go well and their pensions weren't enough for the new higher payments, and she begged me to help, saying that she knew my father had been hard on me, but it was their home of 40 years and they couldn't lose it. I hung up that call with a heavy heart because despite everything, despite the years of criticism and insults, I couldn't let my parents lose their house, as it was the place where I grew up and where all their memories were. So for 6 months I saved aggressively, I cut expenses, I worked overtime, and I turned down family vacations, and Lucy supported me even though she thought I was being too generous with people who didn't deserve it, telling me to do it if I needed to, but not to expect gratitude from them. By December, I had scraped together the full $15,000, which I put in a cashier's check and placed inside an elegant envelope with a card that said, "So you can have peace of mind in your home, with love, Mark." I planned to give it to them on Christmas as a significant gift, so on the morning of December 24th, Lucy, the kids, and I got ready to go to my parents' house for Christmas dinner. Tommy had made a beautiful card for his grandparents, with drawings of the family and the words, "I love you, Grandma and Grandpa," written in his childish handwriting, and Emma had wrapped a small ornament she made at school herself. I carried the envelope with the check in the inside pocket of my jacket, wrapped gifts in my hands, and a chocolate cake I had bought at the best bakery in the city. I was nervous but also excited to be able to help my parents in such a meaningful way, and we arrived at 6 in the evening as agreed. The house was decorated with Christmas lights, the tree was glowing in the living room, and I could hear voices inside because they had also invited my Aunt Rose and Uncle Ernie with their children. I knocked on the door with my foot since my hands were full of gifts and the cake, and my mother opened the door and greeted me without emotion, and when I walked in, my father was sitting there laughing and talking with my aunt and uncle, but his expression when he saw me was not one of joy or welcome. It was pure annoyance. He said out loud enough for everyone to hear, "What a pain. Why do you always have to ruin family moments?" And I stood paralyzed in the doorway while Tommy, who was beside me holding his Christmas card, froze with the card half extended toward his grandfather, and Emma hid behind Lucy. I said, "Excuse me," unable to believe what I had just heard. And my father continued without lowering his voice, saying, "You heard me. Every time you come, you bring your negative energy and your victim face, and we were having a good time here until you arrived." There was uncomfortable laughter and my mother weakly said, "Frank, don't start," but without real conviction, and my father replied that he wasn't starting anything and was only telling the truth, that Mark has always been the family killjoy who manages to ruin the atmosphere even at Christmas. I looked at my son Tommy and saw his eyes had filled with tears while the card he had made with so much love trembled in his little hands, and Emma was crying silently against Lucy's leg, and something inside me that had been bending for 38 years finally snapped. I said with a strangely calm voice that it was fine and we would leave, but this was leaving with me too, and I dropped the gifts and the cake onto the porch floor. I pulled the envelope from my inside jacket pocket and held it up for everyone to see, raising my voice so everyone in the room could hear me as I told them to look at this, because inside was a cashier's check for $15,000, which was his Christmas gift to pay off the mortgage debt and save the house from foreclosure. I saw my father's eyes go wide and heard my mother gasp audibly as I continued, my voice now shaking, not with sadness but with pure rage, telling them I saved for 6 months to give them this. I worked overtime and sacrificed vacations with my family all to help him, even though he had treated me like garbage my entire life. My father's tone changed completely as he said, "Mark, wait," but I interrupted him, saying that since I am such a pain, since I always ruin family moments, and since I bring negative energy, Then clearly I don't deserve to be here and he doesn't deserve this. I started ripping the envelope into pieces, letting the shreds fall to the porch floor like confetti, and the cashier's check was clearly visible among the torn pieces of paper. My mother screamed no and asked what I had done, and I replied with deadly calm that I did what I should have done years ago, which is to stop sacrificing myself for people who don't value me. My father came out onto the porch with his face pale and hands extended, saying, "Wait, son, I didn't mean that. I was joking. You know how I am." I said, "Yes, I know exactly how you are," as I picked Emma up in my arms and took Tommy's hand, and told him, "That is why I am leaving and I am not coming back." My mother screamed desperately that they needed that money and they were going to lose the house, and I told them they should have thought of that before welcoming me with insults at the door and before humiliating me in front of my children again, and I started walking toward my car. My father followed me, shouting not to be ridiculous because it was a joke and I couldn't be so sensitive, so I stopped and turned to him and said that for 38 years he had told me I was a disappointment, a failure, and never enough. And I endured it. But today he did it in front of my children and hurt them too, and that I would never forgive. My mother ran after us begging, saying my father didn't mean it and that we could fix this because they needed the money, but I opened my car door and said no, that money no longer exists for you, and neither do I. We got in the car with Lucy driving because I was shaking too much, and as we drove away I saw my parents standing in the driveway, my father with his hands on his head and my mother crying, both shouting something I could no longer hear. That night at home while we were tucking the kids in, Tommy asked me why Grandpa said those things and if we did something wrong, and I hugged him tight and told him no, that they never did anything wrong, but Grandpa has problems that aren't their fault or mine. And sometimes we have to distance ourselves from people who hurt us, even if they are family. Emma asked with her little voice if we were going to see Grandpa anymore, and I told her not for a while, princess, maybe never, but that it was okay because we are a family, her brother, Mom, and me. And that is the family that matters. The next 2 days were relatively quiet, though my phone blew up with messages from my parents, my aunt, and my uncle, all asking me to reconsider and come back to fix things, but I ignored everything. Then came the early morning of December 27th at 2:30 in the morning when I heard the loud sound of breaking glass, then another, and another, so I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. In the street, illuminated by the neighborhood lights, stood my father with a bag full of rocks, throwing them against the windows of my house one after another with uncontrolled fury, screaming between throws for me to come out and give him his money because I owed it to him. Another window shattered, and Lucy had immediately called 911 while the kids were awake and terrified. My father continued screaming that I was an ungrateful son, and since he gave me life, I owed him that money, and he broke the dining room window and then the kitchen window, completely out of control and possessed by a rage he had probably been accumulating for days. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, and hearing them, my father threw one last stone that went through my study window before trying to flee. But it was too late because 2 patrol cars arrived in seconds, blocking his escape. I watched from the second-floor window as the officers handcuffed him while he kept shouting at my house that it was his money, that his son owed him that money, and they were going to take his house. The officers read him his rights and put him in the patrol car, and one of them came up to take my statement. I told him I had security cameras and showed him my phone where the system had recorded everything, every stone he threw. And the officer reviewed the video with his expression becoming more serious every second, telling me this was aggravated vandalism and asking if I wanted to press charges. I said yes without hesitating, that I wanted to press charges and I wanted a restraining order, and the officer said understood, that with the video the case was quite clear and he would likely spend a few days in jail and have to pay for damages. My father spent 7 days in jail while his case was processed, and the damages to my house totaled $8,500 in repairs that he would eventually have to pay. Plus he received a temporary restraining order prohibiting him from coming within 500 yards of my house or contacting me in any way. During those 7 days, my mother called me constantly, leaving voicemails saying Frank is in jail because of you, asking how I could do this to him when he is desperate and they are going to lose the house, begging me to get him out and give him the money so they could still save their home. I didn't answer a single call, and I blocked her number, along with all the relatives who sent me messages saying I was cruel, that I had exaggerated, and that I should forgive my father because he was stressed. When my father got out of jail, apparently humiliated and broke, he managed to contact me using a friend's number, and I answered not knowing it was him. He said with a voice now devoid of the rage he had shown, filled only with desperation, that it was him and asked me not to hang up. I was tempted to cut the line immediately, but something made me stay on as he continued with his voice cracking, saying, "Son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Sorry for what I said at Christmas and sorry for breaking your windows. I lost my mind because I was desperate. But please, I beg you, give me the $15,000 because I still need it." He said the bank gave them until the end of the month, and if they didn't pay, they would take the house, pleading that he is my father. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and responded with the calmest voice I could muster, saying no, simply that the money doesn't exist for him anymore because I tore it up, remember? And even if I hadn't, I would never give it to him now because he demonstrated exactly who he is, a man who prefers to destroy rather than genuinely apologize. He started crying openly now, saying, "Please, Mark, they are going to take the house, and he and Mom will be on the street," asking if I could live with that. I told him that I was able to live 38 years with him, making me feel like I was never enough, so I can certainly live with this. And besides, it is not my responsibility to save him from the consequences of his own decisions. That he refinanced the house for bad investments, which was his choice, so now he has to live with it. He screamed, "But we are family," and I said with absolute firmness, "No, Family is not treated the way you have treated me, and family definitely does not destroy each other's property in a fit of rage, so he ceased to be my family the moment he threw the first stone at my house with my terrified children inside. He tried to say Mark once more, but I interrupted him to make it clear that he doesn't exist for us anymore, not for me, not for my wife, and definitely not for my children, that I don't want him near them ever again because he was a bad father and won't have the chance to be a bad grandfather too. He started to say you can't, but I interrupted saying I can and I am. Goodbye, Dad, do not contact me again, and I hung up and blocked that number too. That afternoon I sat down with Lucy, and we made the final decision to block my parents' numbers on all our phones, block their social media, and block the numbers of Aunt Rose, Uncle Ernie, and any relative who had justified my father's actions or pressured me to forgive and give them money. I went to the attic and brought down an old box full of family photos from my childhood and adolescence, and Lucy sat with me while we looked through them, photos of birthdays, graduations, and family events where in all of them I seemed to be seeking approval, trying to smile even though my eyes showed sadness. Lucy asked softly if I wanted to keep them, and I said no as I closed the box. That I wanted to put the box in the basement and forget about it because those photos are from a life that is over, from a family that was never really a family. We took it to the basement and put it in a dark corner, and when I closed the door I felt as if I had closed a complete chapter of my life. The following months were an adjustment, and I had to explain to the children several times why they didn't see their grandparents anymore, telling them that Grandpa did very bad things, and sometimes we have to stay away from people who hurt us even if they are family. Tommy, being older, understood more and told me one day that Grandpa broke our windows, which was bad, and he didn't want to see someone who scared Emma, while Emma seemed to have forgotten quickly, proving children are resilient in ways adults can't comprehend. Through mutual acquaintances who still spoke to me occasionally, I found out that the bank did indeed foreclose on my parents' mortgage, and they lost the house in February, moving to a small one-bedroom apartment they could barely afford with their pensions. My father never paid the damages to my house as the judge ordered, and eventually, they would have seized his meager assets, but I decided not to pursue the matter. Paying the $8,500 for repairs myself, and considering that expense the price of my freedom, which was worth every penny. I also learned that my father tried several times to reach me through third parties, sending letters to my work that the receptionist had instructions to return, leaving messages with neighbors who kindly informed me but didn't pass them on. And once he even tried to wait for me outside my office, but security removed him when I reported it. The restraining order was renewed twice, and the third time the judge, seeing the pattern of constant harassment, made it permanent. Today, 14 months after that Christmas that changed everything, I live in complete peace. I have done therapy to process decades of emotional abuse. The children are happy and healthy growing up in an environment where they don't have to walk on eggshells, and Lucy and I are closer than ever. Do I regret tearing up that check? Not for a second, because that moment, that symbolic act of destroying something valuable that he didn't appreciate or deserve, was the moment where I finally valued myself more than the approval of a man who would never give it to me. I am free now, free from the weight of seeking approval that would never arrive, free from the obligation to sacrifice myself for people who never valued it, and free from the guilt they tried to plant in me for finally prioritizing myself and my immediate family. That freedom, that peace, and that tranquility of knowing my children will grow up without the poison of constant belittling is worth infinitely more than $15,000 or any amount of money, because I closed that door forever, and on the other side of it, I finally found what I had been looking for all my life. A real, loving family that values me for who I am, not for what I can give. And for the first time in 38 years, I can honestly say that I am happy. Subscribe for more daily stories.